A biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
Well, on a Tuesday, often good to catch up with Greg Bondar, National Spokesperson for Christian Voice Australia, a national think tank and advocacy group for families, liberty and faith. Greg, a special welcome back to 2020.
Good morning, Neil. Delighted to be with you again, as usual.
Hey, Greg, you've been reflecting on the work of chaplains and religious educators. In fact, 2025, the year of care, an acronym for chaplains and religious educators. Give us your insight here.
Yeah, thank you, Neil. Look, as as you know, amongst my other work, I'm also a chaplain, so I do a lot of chaplaincy work. And interestingly, my wife is a high school teacher at a girls' school. She's also a chaplain, but she does religious education as well. Now, I happen to be the New South Wales president for the Australian Association for Religious Education. And what that means is really that I'm involved in promoting the significance of religious education in schools and universities. And believe it or not, Neil, 2024, the AARE, the association, celebrated 50 years. And I think that's pretty good, Neil, because if I go back to my school days as a bit of a ruffian, I guess, but I used to really enjoy school scripture, Neil.
You were just a boy 50 years ago. Hey, you know, Greg, but this is, I think this is important actually just to stop for a moment, reflect on that, because this organisation, the Australian Association for Religious Education, as you say, the roots go back to 50 years of service as a national association, and that is supporting chaplains and people who are in religious education. So a 50 years history, that's nothing to be sneezed at.
Absolutely not. And that's the point I'm making, Neil, that, when we had scripture at schools, that took us back to our Judeo-Christian foundation, Neil. And I think it was so important that we, got a sort of a balance of where we came from as a society. So, the AARE is saying, okay, let's make 2025 the year of care. So in other words, let's raise the profile of what people are doing in chaplaincy and religious education, particularly in schools and universities now, because it's very important that we don't lose the foundation that the organisation has set up over 50 years ago.
So we've got something of a preview to what might be coming next year, and if you've got a year of some level of celebration, of encouragement for chaplains and religious educators, I imagine that those who are a part of the association, but people who are in schools in leadership roles, perhaps making a little note right now that 2025 will be a special year, and I guess you've got to incorporate that into the way you might be dealing with those chaplains and religious educators if you're in an education setting.
Yeah, absolutely, Neil. And what we're going to try and do is we're going to have a few conferences next year, summits, but we're also introducing a very important program. We're going to read Christian books in libraries, public libraries. So how good is that? We're going to do that instead of having drag queens and what have you that are always in libraries. We're now going to read Christian books for kids in libraries, in public libraries. So that's a real good initiative that we're going to be introducing next year.
Okay, so that'll be an encouragement. And it seems to be there's a little bit of groundswell of momentum that's growing in this space, because a lot of people have been very disturbed by certain people reading stories to children in public libraries, but you're going to be supporting initiatives that actually help to get that going and get people reading Christian books for kids in our public libraries. I think people will be on board and celebrate that fact.
Yeah, absolutely, Neil, absolutely. And also it'll highlight the fact that there are chaplains, there are religious educators in schools, and quite frankly, we've got to try and get away from just teaching whatever they call ethics or whatever. We have to get into what's called religious education, and it's non-denominational, Neil, so we're supportive of that sort of philosophy. So it's very important that we promote the curriculum within schools, because we are under threat now as well.
Okay, a non-denominational organisation, how important is it, Greg, to have that sort of non-denominational umbrella from the Australian Association for Religious Education when it comes to perhaps getting an okay to read those stories in libraries or around issues of professional development? How important is it to have that umbrella?
Look, it's fairly important, Neil, because we're not shying away from the fact that we're a Christian organisation. By Christian, I mean that we're a broad-based church in that sense. So we need to make sure that we have religious educators, Baptist, Anglican, Presbyterian, Evangelical, whatever it might be, that they're involved. But also, if you're a Jewish sort of rabbi and you want to, get involved in religious education, then so be it. I know my wife, as I said, is a religious educator at a girls' school now, and she teaches all about religions, all over the world, and she's very involved in making people know that, Christianity is just one of many other religions.
I know from personal experience that while there are people on the front line doing chaplaincy work and religious education, oftentimes there is a support network that goes behind them. All sorts of committees that form, and they do fundraising and all sorts of things, creating opportunities to boost the work. This Australian Association for Religious Education, you're planning all sorts of things like networking events and educational seminars. That's the sort of thing, I guess, that you want to support the ongoing growth of this body, of these people who are chaplains and religious educators?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, look, we can't lose the people that actually get involved in chaplaincy work and religious education. You see, what happens, Neil, is we need to keep the momentum up in the sense that we need to make sure that schools, universities have access to people that teach religious education. In other words, we've got to make sure that, it's not a dying trade, so to speak. And after 40 years, after 50 years, I think we need to keep the momentum up. We need to let schools and universities know that religious education is important. But again, we want to make sure that we get more teachers, more chaplains involved in spreading the fact that religious education is a good foundation, which is, of course, was the Judeo-Christian foundation on which, education was really built in many ways.
Well, I'm going to give your website at the end of our conversation, and we'll point listeners there, because there might be people who are thinking, well, I could, benefit from being a part of something, a wider body, the Australian Association for Religious Education. So we'll give that website to connect with Greg Bondar at the end of our conversation. Hey, let's talk about non-Christians going to Christian schools. I know that Christian schools don't just get the support of Christian families alone. There's a lot of people that want to get their kids into a Christian school, and they've got their reasons for it, but this seems to be a growing trend, Greg.
Oh, absolutely, Neil. I've been doing some research, quite interestingly, and what we've found is that there's a global trend, in particular with the rise of anti-Semitism, that, the Jewish education children are moving to Christian schools, like in particular Catholic schools, for example, because they're looking for no persecution. They're looking for some sort of comfort zone. They're looking for a safe place. And quite frankly, Neil, in the US, which the research shows, the rise of non-Christians going to Christian schools is on the increase by a fairly high margin. Now, that's an interesting development now.
It is, and to reflect on that for a moment, because we've seen this rising anti-Semitism here, even on our own shores here in Australia. People who are from the Jewish community fearful of some of the protests that happen on the streets, fearful that it's not just people from Middle East background, but there's lots of ordinary Aussies who are also taking a side there, and it's like a rising anti-Semitism. So this not feeling safe means that people from a Jewish background are wanting to put their kids where they will be safe. And I think you mentioned that especially Catholic colleges are a good focus for those Jewish families. What about Protestant Christian schools? Any comparison there?
Yeah, look, Neil, interesting you mentioned that. I mean, I happen to be a part-time lecturer at a well-known Catholic university. I get involved in all sorts of things, Neil, but I lecture at a Catholic university. Neil, I was amazed at the number of non-Christians that were in my class. And I'm talking here atheist, I'm talking here Muslim, I'm talking here Buddhist, and I kid you not, Neil. And I said, is anybody a Catholic here? You know, and interestingly, it was a fairly small percentage. Now, there are probably reasons for a university to do that. They're looking for student numbers, they're looking for income. But Neil, if the universities don't have a quota on a number of non-Christians that attend these universities and schools, the whole foundation of Christianity within those educational institutions will be lost now.
Yeah, I guess there's going to be some who are going to say, well, it's the teaching lecturers that need to have a really great grip on their faith. If you've got atheists and non-Christian people wanting to come to Christian education institutions, I guess what the students talk about in the breaks, that might be an interesting thing. But of course, the important thing is maintaining the teaching staff with that strong Christian ethos in the way that they present their lectures. Wouldn't that be the case?
Absolutely, Neil, because I did meet some of my colleagues. Some of those were not Christian, and in that sense, it was interesting to note that I had a chat to them, but I never let an opportunity go by within my classroom or in my lecture hall to mention a Christian aspect of the Bible. In other words, I try and come to a biblical foundation. I'm keeping to the topic, of course, but the teachers, as you say, or the lecturers need to have some sort of a foundation. So it's a real challenge for the universities and schools, Neil, as to who they select to be their educators.
When we're talking the students, there's no guarantee that even students from Christian families are coming with a depth of Christianity. So there's a big reliance on those educational institutions to have teaching staff who really do hold a solid ethos that promotes what the whole institution is promoting. So really, I guess even if you've got non-Christians or people who claim to be atheists, or they could be from some other foreign religion, in a Christian school setting, the responsibility is still there on the teacher.
Absolutely, Neil. There is a responsibility there, but one of the other things I've found in my research was that not only are, like for example, the Jewish community moving to Christian or to faith schools, there's a big growth in the LGBTIQA community that are also moving to Christian schools. Now that's an interesting development, Neil, because you've got to ask yourself, why would you go to a Christian school if you don't believe in the ethos and the ethics of that particular school? So, in my view, it's for two reasons, I suspect. One is they provide a good education, but two, would it be to undermine Christian principles? Would it be to secularise education? So you've got to ask yourself, Neil, why would you go to a Christian school if you don't believe in the principles that school is, expressing through its education system?
I guess you could get a little bit conspiracy-oriented here, and you could suggest that there might be people who could be plants who might be there to undermine the institution. And I know that Christian education institutions are always mindful that that's a risk. And yet there's a certain tolerance that Christian education institutions have to really bring people in, because that exposes them to their Christian ethos. Is that happening more and more, do you think?
Oh, I think so, Neil. Look, I remember, we've got our religious discrimination bill at the moment, and that is exactly talking about what we have now. In other words, should non-Christians attend a Christian school? And if so, okay, but then do we change? The question we have to ask ourselves is, if I'm a non-Christian and I attend a Christian school, should I abide by the rules of the school? Well, in my view, yes, Neil, you must, because if you don't, the crucial ethos will not be held up within that school. So, what do we do? And I think a lot of schools are under pressure to do nothing, and whereas we should be upholding the Judeo-Christian foundation and the ethos of that school, which is Christianity.
And some international research too, and I think you've had some access to a meta-analysis. In other words, thousands of studies all grouped together and finding those commonalities in the studies that are showing that Christian education institutions actually provide a wonderful higher level of political tolerance and political knowledge. How do you, when you get those sorts of studies, because some people like to, cherry pick studies, but a meta-analysis, and that's showing some good things about Christian education.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I said, I'm not cherry picking, because this is after 13,000 students that were interviewed, the Educational Psychology Review, with both US and UK scholars, found that Christian education is absolutely a benefit to students. In other words, they do promote a higher level of political tolerance, political knowledge and skills. So, they are providing a very good foundation to be tolerant, to be accepted, but not at the cost of giving up your faith within that school. So, let's be very careful as Christians that if a non-Christian comes to our school, do we give up our right to continue our Christian ethos, or do we just accept what the non-Christians want? So it's a real battle, but for me, let's maintain our Christian ethos now.
Good food for thought. Greg Bondar. Greg is the national spokesperson for Christian Voice Australia and wears a lot of caps, as you can hear. You might want to connect with Greg, and if you want to connect with that organisation around the Australian Association for Religious Education, if you want some more detail about what it means for 2025, looking ahead, a bit of a preview to what will come next year with a year of care. CARE being an acronym for chaplains and religious educators, the way you might encourage, the way you might support those who are on the front lines of offering that Christian biblically based care for people in all sorts of situations, whether it's workplaces or whether it's educational institutions. You can connect with Greg at christianvoiceaustralia.blog. christianvoiceaustralia.blog. Greg Bondar, thanks so much for sharing your insights with us once again today on 2020.
Thank you very much, Neil, for the opportunity to spread the good news.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.